Hello everyone, welcome back to another reaction video. Today I'll be reacting to every country that England invaded. This is another fascinating video for me because as a person that comes from a country that was colonized by Britain, Great Britain, UK, or whatever you want to call them, which I'm going to watch. I think my next video is going to be about that because I think there's some confusion in terms of England, Britain and all that. So, but bottom line, coming from a country that was colonized by Britain, England, stroke, whatever you want to call them, I have always been fascinated by the British. That is just the fact of the matter. And at the end of the day, our countries are linked. We are linked. For better, for worse, we are linked. So, obviously, I'm sure my country should be part of this list of countries that were invaded by England. So I'm really looking forward to it. Before I continue, guys, I'm going on this world exploration and I'm really excited. This is really fun. And I'm really glad that you guys have joined me on this journey. If you are new here and you have not joined yet, or if you have been watching and have not joined me on this journey yet, please do me a favor, subscribe to the channel, smash the like button and hit the notification bell. You'll be really doing me a big favor. Now let's get into the video.
Past few centuries, this music was the final boss music played for people across the entire world. The English and later the British have been responsible for invading and conquering more countries.
English, later the British. I thought it's supposed to be British letter before the English, not English, British. Whatever, I'm going to let it in the next video.
And people than any other nation in human history. And honestly, it's startling just how many places they've been to. In
really
this video, I'm going to do my best at attempting to visualize all of Britain's invasions and conquests for you, continent by continent, in as brief a time as possible. So let's begin with the closest continent to Britain, Europe. Ireland was the first target of British conquests and was invaded as early as 1169. Within 400...
I thought Ireland was already part of Britain. Man, this is really confusing. So Ireland was already part of Britain, like, so, anyway.
100 years of gradual conquests, the entire island was
ruled 1169.
By the British. It remained that way until most of it was granted independence in 1921.
Okay, that's a very long time ago. That's why I actually thought that, because basically that is from 1169. That is a very long time ago. So they have been together for a very long time. So that's why I was thinking in my head like that. I thought it was part of, Britain.
Historically, France has probably been invaded by the English more times than any other country in the world. Just take a look at this huge list of invasions. There's not even enough time to talk about a third of these. And for a time, all of this territory inside of modern France was directly controlled by the English, with Calais being the final piece that fell in 1557. Well, except for that time when the British took over Corsica for a couple years. The British continue to invade Spain.
The Napoleon Wars, is it about the British versus France? Like, is that what it's about? Because I know Napoleon is one of France's, legendary warriors and all that. Was the war that he fought that made him legendary, was it against the British? Please tell me in the comments down below.
By the millions every winter, but in the past, they've come with a lot less friendly intentions. English and later British soldiers invaded under the Black Prince in 1367 and continued on through the first, second, third, and fourth raids on Cadiz and that time when the British took over Gibraltar and Minorca.
Wow.
They gave Minorca back, but decided on keeping Gibraltar forever. In recent history, the British have invaded Belgium in order to support the Belgians. But that wasn't always the case. They conducted two pretty large-scale invasions of modern-day Belgium in 1654 and again in 1701. And Flanders itself was ruled by the English for a few years.
These guys really go around, man. Like, they were just sitting down, just going to different places. Like, we can't just sit. We can't. They were telling themselves like, we can't just sit down here and be chilling here in this barren land, which is true. Like the British, the land itself, England, Britain, or whatever, is not really rich in resources. At least from what I learned while growing up. I don't know whether I'm right. If I'm not right, tell me in the comments. This is why I'm here. But I don't think the British are really rich in resources. So you can't really blame them for wanting to step out and look for resources elsewhere.
In the 14th century, the Netherlands was one of England's historical arch rivals, and so there's been plenty of invasions going in this direction across the 17th and 18th centuries. In 1940, the British technically invaded and took over Iceland peacefully for a year in order to prevent it from falling into the hands of the Germans. But this was heavily protested by the Icelandic government at the time, so in my books it still counts as an invasion. Italy, of course, was invaded by the British Army during the Second World War as well in 1943, but there were plenty of invasions before then, dating back to Richard the Lionheart's invasion in 1190. Germany, too, was obviously invaded by the British Army in 1945, and northwestern Germany was occupied by the British for 3 years until 1948. But a lot of German territory was ruled by Britain long before then. The islands of Heligoland were British for most of the 19th century, and the Kingdom of Hanover was effectively ruled under a personal union for over a century between 1714 and 1837. Austria was also invaded in 1945, and the southwest of the country was occupied for a decade. Norway was invaded in 1810 and 1812 during the Napoleonic Wars when it was a part of Denmark-Norway because Denmark was aligned to France, so obviously Denmark was invaded during that time as well. Finland, Estonia, and Latvia were all briefly invaded by small units during the Crimean War against Russia because they were all part of the...
These guys get around, man. These guys get around. Like, these guys basically invaded everywhere, man. They invaded everywhere. Seriously, like, where did they not invent? At least in Europe, they invaded everywhere in Europe. At least. Damn. Wow. I mean, when you think about this, like, put yourself in the shoes of a soldier that is the invader. Like, especially if you are going to a land or a country for the first time, like your country has never gone to that place before. You are just landing there. What gives you the confidence that you are going to be able to conquer these people that you are going to meet? What gives you that confidence? Is it that the British were the only people that had guns at the time? I mean, like, the way they were just able to go here and just be invading, like, I know coming Africa at that point, we didn't have any of these weapons, so it was easy to invade us, but all these European countries, man, like, it's interesting.
Empire at the time, and of course, Russia itself was invaded then too, as well as in 1918 when the British took over a large chunk of northern Russia for a time in their fight against the Bolsheviks. The territory of modern Ukraine was invaded by British army units during the Crimean War. The British took over the Croatian island of Vis between 1807 and 1814 during their fight against Napoleon. The British army had boots and guns on the ground in Bosnia recently between 1992 and 95 fighting against the Bosnian Serbs, and around the same time the RAF also carried out bombing strikes against Serbian Serb targets in Serbia in 1999. Montenegro was briefly blockaded and invaded in 1913 during the First Balkan War. The British owned the westernmost Ionian islands of Greece between 1815 and 1863 before they gave them back, while Bulgaria was invaded and almost entirely occupied by the British Army between 1918 and 1919 at the end of World War I. Cyprus was a British protectorate between 1878 and 1914 when they decided to just outright annex it to piss off the Turks, and it remained annexed until 1960, except for two small chunks that are still British today. Turkey itself was massively invaded by the British during World War I, and part of it was occupied between 1919 and 1923. That wraps up Europe, so let's move on to Asia next. Modern-day Israel and Palestine, as well as Jordan, were British-controlled from the end of World War I to 1948 and 1946, respectively. Lebanon and Syria were both occupied from the Vichy French government briefly during World War II. Iraq was ruled between 1919 and 1932 and invaded again during the Second World War, and again in 1991, and again in 2003. Kuwait was a colony for over 60 years until 1966. Georgia and Azerbaijan were both invaded and occupied right at the end of World War I for a year.
Guys, you guys should enlighten me. Were the British the only people with guns? I mean, I would like to know, because I get it, they had a good navy and all that, but without weapons, even with like all the ship was just going to carry you there. But and it's not like they had speedboats those days. Like these ships spent months in the sea. So it's not like you're telling me to just go here and go here and go here. It took time. It took months to go to this place, come back to this place. So that means bottom line is that they spread themselves out. So who was protecting the country while they were out here, flexing their muscle? Who was protecting the country? How many soldiers did they have? Is it that the whole population were soldiers? Like, this is really interesting. Seriously. Really interesting. I'm actually enjoying it because I've always been intrigued about this. I'm actually enjoying it. I hope you guys are enjoying it as well.
Iran has been invaded at least 3 times, with the most notable example being the joint Anglo-Soviet invasion of 1941. Turkmenistan was invaded in 1918 to prevent Bolshevik influence from spreading any further. Afghanistan is a favorite British invasion spot since it's been invaded in 1839, 1878, 1919, and again in 2001. Qatar, Bahrain, the United Arab Emirates, and Oman were all controlled by the British until the early 1970s, while a chunk of Yemen was controlled for over a century between 1839 and 1967. India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Sri Lanka were all, of course, invaded many times and outright ruled by the British Empire in parts for nearly 2 centuries between 1757 and 1947. Nepal was invaded in 1814 but never successfully conquered. Bhutan was invaded in 1772 and again in 1864 and was sort of conquered as a protectorate between 1910 and 1948. Burma/Myanmar was invaded in 1826 and was definitely successfully conquered and ruled through 1947. Thailand was briefly invaded in 1945 since they were allied to Japan in World War II, and so was Vietnam in the same year, but that was to support the French government against the growing independence movement. Malaysia and Singapore were each conquered and ruled up until the 1950s and 1960s. Brunei was conquered and ruled up until the 1980s, whereas the Philippines were briefly invaded during the 7 Years' War. China got invaded a lot, and Hong Kong was a colony until as recently as 1997.
Wow.
And while not outright invaded, part of Japan was occupied following World War II between 1946 and 1952. And finally, Indonesia was invaded a bunch during the Napoleonic Wars since it was a Dutch colony aligned to France at the time. Next up, Oceania. Australia and New Zealand, of course, were invaded by the British and established as colonies that each gained independence in 1931. Papua New Guinea was also a British colony for a time, as were the island countries of Fiji, Kiribati, the Solomon Islands, Tuvalu, and Vanuatu. Let's move back over to Africa next, which the British have violently visited a lot. In terms of just place...
You heard what he said? Violent... What am I even saying? Violently.
As the British outright colonized after invasions, there's the Gambia, Sierra Leone, Ghana, Nigeria, Egypt, Sudan, South Sudan, Uganda, Kenya, Tanzania, Zambia, Malawi, Zimbabwe, Botswana, Namibia, and South Africa, along with parts of modern-day Somalia and Guinea. Senegal was briefly invaded and had some of their coastline taken over in the 1700s, while during the Second World War, the British invaded the French colonies of Djibouti, Madagascar, and Comoros after they aligned themselves with the Nazi Vichy regime, and the Italian colonies of Libya, Eritrea, and Ethiopia, although they had also invaded Ethiopia much earlier in 1868. And as German colonies right before World War I, the British also invaded Togo and Cameroon without annexing them afterwards. For the final area of the world left to discuss, let's move over to the Americas. All of Canada was a British colony until 1931, while Newfoundland remained until 1949. The United States, of course, was a colony until 1776, and was invaded again in 1812, and the modern states of Oregon and Washington were claimed right up until 1846. As far as other outright British colonies here go, there was the Bahamas, Jamaica, Belize, Grenada, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Barbados, St. Lucia, Dominica, Antigua and Barbuda, St. Kitts and Nevis, Trinidad and Tobago, and Guyana. Besides colonies, Cuba was invaded and occupied during the 7 Years' War in 1762. Haiti was invaded in 1793 during the French Revolutionary Wars. The Dominican Republic was invaded way back in 1655 in an attempt at conquest under Oliver Cromwell. Parts of the east coast of Honduras and Nicaragua were conquered and ruled for nearly 2 centuries until 1819. They sent the Navy to invade Mexico in 1861 to force them to repay some debts, and during the splendidly named War of Jenkins Year, aka the more lame-sounding War of the Austrian Succession, the British invaded a lot of Spain's colonies, including Panama, a huge one into Colombia, and ultimately Peru. In 1796, the British took over Suriname because it was a Dutch colony, and they were allied with the revolutionary French and later Napoleon. They also invaded Martinique and Guadeloupe because they actually were French during the Napoleonic Wars. Venezuela was invaded in 1902 as part of the so-called Venezuela crisis to force the country to repay some debts they had defaulted on, kind of like Mexico, while Argentina and Uruguay were both invaded during the Napoleonic Wars as well in 1806 when Spain and her colonies were still allied with Napoleon. And that pretty much sums up all of the territory the British have ever ruled and all of the countries this small island has ever invaded. There are a total of 65 countries today who celebrate their independence days from the British Empire.
Damn.
The empire used to rule over a quarter of all the world's land at the same time and was
At the
the
same
biggest
time.
empire in human history.
At the same time. Like how is it possible? From such a small country. Seriously, it's from a small country. I don't know how much population they had at the time, but I don't care how much population you have. Like, to be able to keep, there's a difference between invading and actually invading and keeping the place. Like, they actually invaded and stayed. Sometimes for centuries, sometimes for decades. I mean, you can't blame me for being impressed. You can't blame me. Seriously, this is just impressive. Seriously.
And in total, today, there have been 117 modern countries that have been aggressively invaded by the British armed forces during some point in their histories, representing a total of 60% of all the world's nations, which is almost the same number of countries that you can...
Oh, guys, the British are really impressive. At least the British of the past. I'm just playing. I was really looking forward to watching these videos about the British. I don't know. These were the only two videos plus the one that someone recommended for me. The difference between UK and Britain and the rest. So if there are other videos that talk about the British Empire, the British and the rest that are not similar to this, that are talking about different things, you guys suggest to me down below. I really want to watch about the British. Also, any other video suggestions that you guys have, put it down in the comments below. Even if I don't watch it in the next month or in the next 2 months or before the end of the year, I will still watch it. I write all of them down. I will still get to it. I just have to put it in the right order, the way I think it's proper. Anyway, guys, I hope you guys enjoyed the reaction. If you really enjoyed it, please smash the like button. I really appreciate it. It helps with the algorithm. Till next time, peace.